The Competition Commission says retailers, processors and producers passed on unjustified price increases on essential products such as sunflower oil, white and brown bread to consumers over the past 2 years. Now, this comes as South African consumers continue to wrestle with food inflation, which is at its highest rate in 14 years. In the latest essential food pricing monitoring report released by the Commission yesterday, the body said that at the same time, there had been opportunistic price increases in maize meal to consumers over the past 24 months. Now, the report, which is the 8th one issued by the body since 2020, also had a special focus on the feed-to-poultry value chain in 2022. Joining us now for more on this is the Competition Commission's Head of Communications, Sipho Ngwema. Sipho, reading that upsets me. It really does. How much more can South Africans take? I know that the Competition Commission has flagged price increases as opportunistic and may not be justified by costs on certain food basics over the past 2 years. Give us more details.
Good morning, and thanks once again, Leanne, for having us on the program. Yes, indeed, we are very concerned because the people who bear the brunt of these high prices, this elevated inflation, are the poor. And we look at these essential food items simply because since the advent of COVID, we have been receiving a lot of complaints, but also we have noticed a lot of movements with regards to prices. And of course, we investigated a number of cases. And what this particular report focuses on, it's those essential items that you mentioned. And we are worried because there seems to be no relationship or no connection between the input costs that would then be borne by the producers and the processors and the price that consumers pay at the till. And this is what worries us because we seem to think there is no justification of these prices. Of course, there are investigations that are going on with regard to some of the complaints that have been laid to us. But these issues, they worry us because agriculture is very critical for the well-being of South Africans in general, and with regards to issues of food security, issues of employment, and therefore we are very worried. And you also mentioned chicken. We are worried about some of because the feed costs in terms of chicken, it's about 70%. And part of the biggest problem as well is the fact that when government imposed import duties so that you limit the entry of foreign chicken, what our farmers did and producers did, instead they raised the price, which then the consumer bore the brunt of. And these are the things that concern us and they worry us, and we continue to monitor them.
Yeah, and most definitely, because I mean, when you look at this, I mean, you talk about the whole poultry line, and that's a big focus of it. But I want to even talk of something very, very close to our hearts. And I mean, you put it in percentages here. So from January to December last year, 2022, the retail price for white and brown bread went up 20% and 19% respectively. These are staples. This is basic food products. I mean, it had increased faster than the producer prices, which suggests that shelf price increases might not be justified by the costs. And that's the key here. That's really what we're talking about. And the same can be said for maize meal, increasing 32% over the same period. Who's held accountable for this? Because it just seems that something is not right here.
Look, what the report does is to monitor. I have an overview, and you have correctly said those increases. On the other hand, you'll find that, for example, with the producers of bread, the increases were only 14 and 15% respectively, with maize with about 28%. And there's a gap here. And as I said earlier, the consumers bear the brunt of this. But we as a commission, we have the instruments to investigate. We are investigating since June last year, a number of big retailers. We're investigating cases of excessive pricing. We are also investigating a number of processors because we receive complaints of excessive pricing. On the other hand, because this is very close to our heart and we need to understand what influences the prices of fruits and veg. So on Friday, we are starting a fresh produce market inquiry, which is going to dive deeper into these issues so that at the end of the day, we're able to understand what exactly influences these prices, what influences the prices that we see or we pay at the tills, so that at the end of the day, we can be able to make recommendations, we can be able to have findings that lead to recommendations. On the other hand, if there are people who have broken the law, they are in breach of the Competition Act, we should be able to prosecute those people. So those are the instruments that we have. And in terms of the recommendations, we're able to make recommendations to Parliament via the Minister, and the law can be made, interventions can be made by the relevant bodies that would have pronounced upon investigating and finishing the inquiry. So those are some of the things that we're able to do. So we have noted these things in terms of this report, but in terms of the investigations, thorough investigations that have to be done, there are those processes, and those processes will lead us to solutions.
Yeah, I mean, I know that you're going to investigate further products. I mean, whether we're talking about cooking oil, maize meal, rice flour, margarine, pasta, all of these at retail and wholesale levels. This is what you are going to embark on now. But very quickly, I know that time is not on our side, but I want to talk about the poultry. You started speaking about that because, I mean, this is a staple, the staple food of South Africa, and yet we are looking at such an intricate chain of events that are leading to these price increases that are this is not necessarily as it looks, and there could be a major problem when it comes to the pricing of chicken. Perhaps talk to us about this.
Look, when it comes to chicken, the number of things that we take into account, we take into account that there are challenges. For example, when it comes to avian influenza that has been in Europe and in America, but also, as I said earlier, we have imposed import duties. You must remember, South Africans consume about 2.3 million tons of chicken, and we can only afford internally to produce 1.9. And therefore, we rely to some extent to imports. But what then happens is that when import duties are imposed to protect our own farmers and producers, what they do instead, they raise the prices, meaning that the absence of the imported chicken is passed on to the consumer instead of them taking advantage of the import duties and making sure that they supply the market. So those are some of the challenges. I've mentioned the flu. I've mentioned the biggest challenge worldwide is animal feed. So it's chicken feed because it accounts for about 70% of that. So those input costs are taken into account with regards to the price of chicken. But we're monitoring it so that at the end of the day, because the majority of South Africans poor, chicken is their staple food. And therefore, we need to monitor that so that the prices don't balloon. They are not unreachable to the poor and the citizens of South Africa. But we take into account of the costs that farmers and producers have to bear so that prices in the end are not excessive, they are within the law.
We can understand that. Just a final comment from you with regard to VAT, because I do know that when we talk about the Poultry Association, they are wanting chicken to form part of the VAT-exempt food products. Are you in agreement with them? I mean, is that something that we could see happening? Because it's just becoming unaffordable.
I think that's something that they must talk to the revenue, South African Revenue Services. I think as important stakeholder, they can be able to engage in those things. What we are responsible for in terms of our own regulation is just to make sure that prices are affordable and nothing is outside the ambit of the Competition Act. And I think that the South African Revenue Services can be able to listen to those farmers, and if they have a rational and sensible proposition to make, I think that thing can be considered by the relevant authorities. For us, we have to make sure that we execute the mandate of the Competition Act, and as far as the law that we have before us right now, it means that we have to monitor what happens between production and the price that consumers pay at the till.
All right, we've got to leave it there. Sipho, thanks for talking to us. Competition Commission's Head of Communications, Sipho Ngwema.